G'day, I'm Stephen Travers. Welcome to this live session. So, are you a beginner artist or do you feel like a beginner artist? In this video, I want to talk about 10 points that I think beginners are particularly likely to make in their drawing. And this can really set them back in terms of overall drawing development because the length of time we spend doing something isn't often as important for how well we go. Sorry, I have a phone playing down there that's making too much noise. How we go, how long we spend doing something often isn't as important for the outcomes as the way we do it. We can spend a lot of time wandering in the wilderness and not getting very far towards our goal if we're not careful. And I think that's the kind of thinking I've got with these 10 points. Good morning from the north side. I think you mean the northern hemisphere. We have a part of Sydney that's called the north side, but it's certainly not morning there. So yeah, welcome on this, for me, very, very hot Sunday night. I've just turned the aircon off. We seem to have gone from really cold to really hot really quickly. But yes, welcome to this discussion. So the first point, and they're not in order, but I think the first mistake I see beginners make when I look at drawing, and I get a sense often from Instagram and also from people who I give one-on-one drawing classes to, and that's that it's so easy to rush too far too quickly with what we're attempting to do. Because when we're beginning, and I assume that I'm talking about self-taught artists, because if I'm doing a course, if I have a teacher, then I shouldn't be making these mistakes because I have someone trained guiding what I do, guiding the actual things I do, guiding the pace of what I'm doing. 12 degrees in sun. Well, we had, I don't know, 32 degrees in sun here, guiding what I'm doing. And so these issues aren't such a problem. Sorry, I've got a drop of water on my glasses. That's just driving me crazy. If you wear glasses, you'll know. I just rushed in and cleaned my teeth before I before I started, and I splashed myself. So there I go. It's so easy with drawing, particularly where we're drawing, as we often are, subjects that we love, to get carried away by our enthusiasm for the subject, and for that to not mislead us, but to distract us from choosing an appropriate subject, because we just want to do a nice drawing of something that we love. And so we start drawing things that we've got no chance of drawing well. No chance of drawing well. And I don't say that to be judgmental or discouraging, but the truth is, when we start, we're not going to do challenging subjects well because we're learning. Learning is a process. And when I'm a beginner, by definition, I haven't learned much, or I haven't learned anything. And so it's important that I learn fundamental principles first, learn to do those well, and then build on them. I won't go into the piano metaphor again, but any instrument or any skill really, if you've ever studied a subject, particularly as an adult, and been more aware of the way it's done, then you'll remember that we start with the things that we need to know most, the most basic things, maybe look at materials and how they work, and then how these things come together in the fundamental building blocks or units or understandings or concepts that we need to know to then start to do more complicated things. And so in drawing, often for very first lessons, we're getting used to our materials, whether it's pen or it's pencil, and we're starting to learn some of the flexibility of the materials that we have. We're not, and the materials that we draw on, the surfaces that we draw on, we're not worried about producing anything at the start. We're exploring. So I think that's the first thing we think, oh, I'm going to learn to draw, and I have all this enthusiasm in my imagination for the things that I think I'm going to draw. Look, hello everyone. Those who have come in, welcome. And look, if you have a mistake that you made as a beginner, and whether that was last week or whether that was 20 years ago, 30 years ago, please put it in the chat, and I'll try and see it and mention it. It may be something I have on my list here, or it may be a point that I haven't heard but haven't included. But if you've got a thought of something that in your personal experience wasted some of your time, then please mention it in this. Hi there, and Charlie. Okay, so that's the first list, because that's the first point. Because if we rush in and draw things that are too complicated, what's going to happen is we're going to draw them badly, and then we'll draw them again badly, and we'll draw them again badly, and we will get very good at drawing things badly. And if we draw things badly over and over again, what happens is we lose the ability to see that they're not right. We lose the ability to see that we haven't captured what we're trying to capture. And then it becomes harder to step out of that. It becomes harder to overcome the kind of the mindset and the way we've got used to seeing what we do. And it looks normal to us. And then if we do get input that is potentially helpful, it's harder for us to see it. So it is really important not to run before we can walk. Okay, toddlers toddle before they walk, because they learn things on the way that they will need about balance when they do start walking. Okay, that's the first point then. Don't go too far, too fast in the subjects that you draw. And make sure that before you go to harder subjects, that what you've done, you've done well. And how you know you've done it well that's another issue as well if you're self-taught. But that's still an important thing to try and work out. So the second thing, I think, the mistake that beginners make is they don't begin appropriately. So often when we start to learn to draw, there's understandably a lot of nervousness, and some of us are just a little less secure or confident about starting new things anyway, or it may be artistic things in particular. That's a good point. ZZZ. That's actually one of my points further on. That they don't start appropriately. So, for instance, if what I want to do is to draw in pen, I start in pencil because that feels easier, and that suits my lack of confidence, because I think, well, I can erase any lines that aren't correct. But the problem is that drawing in pencil won't teach me to draw in pen. It will teach me to draw in pencil, and it won't take me to where I want to end up. If where I want to end up is drawing in ink, I won't learn to appreciate the difficulties and the benefits of drawing in ink. I think often because in school we draw in pencil before we draw in ink, or we write in pencil before we write in ink, where there is a progression perhaps that's helpful. But it's not helpful when it comes to art, because as an art medium, graphite is a very different medium to ink. The way it's put on the paper, the effects you can create with it, and the pros and cons, and certainly the ability to erase one and not the other. And so if what I want to do is to become confident and good at drawing freehand directly in pen, then I need to start drawing directly in pen, because that's the only way I will learn how to do that. If what I want to do is to learn how to draw in graphite or in charcoal or in any other medium, then I need to start with that. It doesn't mean, of course, that I can't explore and have fun with other things along the way. But my focus, and certainly my starting focus, needs to be on the medium that, as a beginner, I want to become an expert at. So it's important that we start with what we want to finish, and connect it with that, not just medium, but the technique we use. And I mention this quite a lot, but if what I want to do is to be able to draw freehand in whatever I draw it with, it's important that I don't start by tracing or copying the drawings of other artists. Again, because this won't develop in me the skills I need to develop to be able to draw freehand. It feels safer, and I can, the problem is I can produce a better looking drawing more easily. And so therefore it's very tempting to do. But unfortunately, it then gives me an unrealistic assessment of my skill. And I look at a traced drawing or a drawing where I've copied someone else's lines, and I might have traced the drawing of someone else's lines. And yes, I can think, oh, I've done that. This looks really good. But it hasn't given me the skills I need to produce my own original freehand drawing. And so it can end up being discouraging because I feel that I'm better than I really am. And what I've done is I've wasted time to confuse myself. Now, if what I want to do is to produce drawings that are traced, that's fine. If I want to learn to copy well for some reason, then that's fine. But generally, most people who draw are really wanting to be able to draw their own original artworks some way or another in some medium or the other. And so we have to, yeah, it's not a shortcut that's helpful to take, although it's very easy to take. And it can be easy to think, well, I'm just beginning, so this will get me going. This will be an easier way to start. And it is an easy way to start, but it's not going to take me, it's a totally different road going in a different direction, and it won't take me where I'm wanting to go. So it will just, as I said, mislead and confuse me. So g'day Mel, g'day Ria. Yeah. Okay. Okay. The third point that I think beginners make, and I see this, is that they want an artwork rather than a learning experience. And again, this is coming back to a point I often make in various contexts in my videos, that when we learn to draw, the more important word than draw is learn. This is a learning experience. This is a learning development. And there are ways we learn regardless of what we're learning. And so we need to focus on, I'm learning. And if I happen to produce an artwork anywhere along the learning stage, that's great. But I'm not expecting to, because quite often time is better spent not trying to produce an artwork at all, but just focusing on a small area of what I'm doing. So I might just focus on line work. I mean, not that I think we have to spend hours and hours drawing straight lines that will make it, but we need to spend some time improving our familiarity with our pen and the lines and the marks that it makes, or whatever we use, exploring the possibilities. And we can do that far more quickly and therefore achieve far more in it by just exploring the marks and not drawing a whole drawing around them, just perhaps drawing small parts where we use those marks. Yeah, so I think that's important to not be thinking I'm going to get a drawing that I'm going to be very proud of and show people and put in a frame, and I've bought the frame before I've done the drawing, because that can often just lead to paralysis and fear of making mistakes. Because once I think the purpose of my sitting down to draw is to get an artwork, then it becomes really important that I don't make a mistake. And that can freeze us up. That can feed a perfectionistic mindset and make us or make us freeze halfway through a drawing because the first half's gone well, and now I'm afraid I'm going to mess it up. When if I'm not thinking of it as an artwork, I've got nothing to mess up. I've got paper and a pen, and I am exploring possibilities of creating scenes and effects and objects on paper. And so not thinking artwork is very important. And I think one of the pressures to have artwork is because we often connect our drawing journey with social media. And that can mean I want to have something that looks good that I can post. But that's often not productive to, especially at the start, to what we're wanting to achieve and the way we're going to achieve it. And so that can encourage us to take shortcuts, such as copying someone else's drawing. And I have over and over again on Instagram seen people who have copied my drawings without a credit to no acknowledgement that they've copied my drawing and posted it as if they had drawn it themselves. And that's not honest. And if you do that with one of my drawings and I see it, then you'll have a comment from me saying, please credit my drawing that you've copied this from. And I don't particularly mind if people copy my drawings. I don't think it's a good learning task to do. But if you do, you need to credit the original artist because you've copied their creative work, their creative output, and you need to acknowledge that. Okay, that's the third point. The problem is people want artworks rather than learning experiences. And the best learning experiences for beginners will often not produce an artwork at the end. And we need to be free to explore and to take risks and to have things not work out, because that's how we learn to do what will work out. Okay, my fourth point I think beginners often make is not using references, just drawing from imagination. Now, I say start the way you want to finish, but I think this is one exception to that. Because if what you want to do is to be able to draw from imagination, I think it's still helpful at the very start to draw from references. Because if I draw from a reference, I'm able to refer back and look to see, have I achieved it? Does it look like the reference? If I draw from my imagination, there's no accountability with what I've drawn to me or to anyone else. The chances are the next day I won't even remember what I was really thinking, what I was really trying to draw. So I've got no easy way of knowing that I've achieved it. And being able to know that we've achieved what we were trying to achieve is an important part, if we're self-taught, of working out how we're doing, which is really important. So I think even if our goal is to become adept at drawing from our imagination, I think it is helpful to learn to draw from references at the start so that I can see what I've done and I can compare it with something and be able to judge, have I achieved it? And then when I do start to draw from imagination, I've got a stronger skill set of creating forms that are real and that can capture something. Because it's obviously harder to draw something from our imagination well, because it's harder to see it as precisely. So when we draw from references, if we're drawing the sort of subjects we want to draw from our imagination later on, we're also priming our imagination with more reference that it can draw on. So if I want to be able to, say, create buildings from my imagination for whatever reason, then the more real buildings that I practice with from reference photos, I'm feeding into my brain the way architecture works, the way buildings and parts of buildings go together, of all the components that are in a building, and perhaps the little parts that we don't think of perhaps, and certainly decorative elements, how they fit on and what they look like. And when I've built up this now library of architecture and parts of architecture and how houses look and perspective angles and all of that, I now have all of this in my head as this vast reference book that when I draw from my imagination, I can flick through the pages and I can find things and see them more clearly. If I'm just going on my life experience of looking at things, there's a big difference between looking at something and think I know what it is and being able to draw it, having seen enough detail, enough information to draw it. And so I think that is a really important thing. Yes, that is a painting in the background. I painted for 10 years in oils before I did any drawing at all. And this is one of my big paintings. It's almost as tall as I am if you stand it the other way. It's an Australian gum tree. And the reason I think I'm fairly successful in drawing trees is I learned how to draw trees first, painting them. And this is where I think I developed my mindset for drawing the effect of details. Let's just have a look at some of the things in the chat. Um, Someone saying I end up detailing a lot in the beginning that then struggle to blend the subject with the background. Okay, yep. So that's more getting, and yep, this isn't one of my points, but it's a really good point, Ria, of of being able to draw the whole scene as a whole scene and not as parts. And often when we're beginners, we focus on each little part so intensely because we're so focused on getting it right that we don't have a bigger picture. This is actually an excellent point. I should have got this point, Ria. Yeah. Thanks for bringing this up. We fail to appreciate that in the end, someone looking at our drawing is not looking at each little part bit by bit. They're looking at a scene, whatever. And so I mean, it might be just a figure, but it's the whole figure or a whole face, whatever it is. And we need to manipulate all the parts of the scene. And that may mean we draw different parts differently to create an overall scene. And we're going beyond composition. We're talking about the technique we use on the composition, that we don't necessarily use the same technique over every part of it. So very important point. What else are we looking at? Drawing for 15, 20 minutes every day. Is drawing 15 to 20 minutes every day enough to achieve a good level in less than a month? Look, it depends how long is a piece of string. It depends what level you're starting at. It depends what you're drawing. It's not, I mean, it's great. And you will certainly improve if you do it wisely. But I don't think you'll be having an exhibition at the end of the month if you weren't able to have one at the start of the month. I think that most things take longer to do well at than a month. If you were learning the guitar and you were learning it for 15 to 20 minutes every day for a month, do you think you'd be ready to play things for people to listen to? You will improve, but I don't know that you could say if you were starting that you would be at a good level. You'd be at a higher level than you were at. A way to practice is draw everywhere with, yep. So just draw all the time with a ballpoint pen. So yeah, the way we're talking in terms of mistakes, the mistake would be, and again, this isn't one of my points, the mistake would be to make a big deal out of a drawing session and to think it's this big grand thing where you've got to get set up and have a lot of time, and when in fact we can create drawing sessions with 10, 15 minutes. The wonderful thing about drawing is it's so accessible. Some of you are going to get ads in a minute, so please don't skip them. For my sake, thank you. Let them appear on the screen. When I would do an oil painting session, sometimes by the time I got all the paint out and I got ready to paint, I was tired and didn't feel like painting anymore. But drawing is so accessible. We can have a pen in our pocket and a small sheet of paper, a little book in our pocket, and we can have 10 minutes at a bus stop waiting for a bus and just draw anything that's within our view. So yeah, that's a great point. Especially true for organic forms. Yep. 10 years, that's some dedication. Well, I enjoyed doing it. I enjoyed doing it very much. Oh, thank you, Amir. That's kind. Look, I've never drawn by ballpoint pen. I've always used fine liner in terms of my ink drawing. I am thinking of exploring with a fountain pen, as I call them, or a dip pen. I think probably I would use. So Freud is saying they were watching a portrait lesson that said the same thing. People zoom in on eyes, mouths, nose, and draw details in a way that end up not fitting together as a whole. Yeah. Yep. We always need to have a sense of how we want our whole scene to look. And I think, again, another mistake I haven't put in my list of 10, but it's a really important one. So I'll include it now. And it's sprung from what you've said, Frodo, is that when we draw from a photo, that we think our goal is to reproduce the photo as accurately as we can, when it's not. Our goal is to create and artwork. It's to improve on the photo. It's to do the things that a photo can't do. It's to overcome the weaknesses of a photo that don't have to be a weakness in our drawing. And it's also to make choices from what's in the photo to be in our drawing. It's a mistake to think that literalness, being overly literal with reproducing what's in the reference, is our main goal. Now, look, we photorealism in art. Look, I love it when it's well done. I could never have the patience to do it, but when you see those, basically grains of sand on a beach and that looks like a photo and someone's painted them all and caught the light on them and all of those things, phenomenal, incredible skill and focus. I'm not talking about that, but it's easy to think that my aim is to reproduce the reference, the photo, accurately. And that often means I capture, if I do it well, even I capture the weaknesses of the photo. My aim should always be to improve on the reference. So thank you. That was a great point. Um, yep. Beat it. If we can catch ourselves improving, that's a great thing. And look, one way we can do that is every 6 months, draw the same thing and just compare the 6 monthly drawings of the same subject and see that perhaps the ways our thinking has matured as to how we're going to represent what's in that scene. Okay. Point number 5 is, for mistakes beginners make, is worrying about our materials too much at the start. I'm amazed. I'm so amazed at how many comments I get saying, "Oh, what pens do you use? What pens do you use? What pens do you use? What are you using? Please tell me what you're using." I mean, I'm happy to tell you what I'm using, but I just don't think it's that important. It's not nearly as important as why I'm doing what I'm doing and how I'm doing what I'm doing. And the fact that I use this pen or that pen, or you could use a ballpoint pen that you happen to have in your pocket, is when we're beginning, our materials make very little difference most of the time, particularly in drawing. Now, yes, there are things I can do with nicer materials, but they're not a game changer. And in fact, buying expensive materials when I'm starting can actually actually hold back my drawing improvement, because it can make me scared to use them. It can make me scared of wasting them, because I've just paid all this money for these pens and I think, oh, I'd like to try drawing this, but gosh, it's going to use so much ink if I use the marker for this and for that and for that. I better use something that doesn't have as much marker in it. And so it can be very counterproductive in that way to do that. So yeah, worry a whole lot less about the materials. Using the pens I use really isn't going to make a big difference in drawing the way I draw. What you need to do if you want to draw in some way like the way I draw is to understand the way I think, because the way I think determines the marks I put on the paper. And then you can look at whatever technical skills or abilities are needed to put those marks on the paper. But if you're not thinking the way I'm thinking, then you're not going, and I'm not saying you have to, but if you want to, then it's understanding how I think, understanding when I look at a reference, what I'm looking for, how I start my drawing, how I progress my drawing. They're the things, if my drawing style is something that you'd like to incorporate into your drawing style, that's the way you'll do it. It's by understanding how I think, more so than where I hold my pen, and a whole lot more than what brand of pen I use. I would say when we start to learn to draw, we should buy cheap materials that we can be extravagant with, that we can waste freely and quickly and easily. So, g'day, Ali. Glad you could join us. We're on point 6 now. And so I did mention it. I'll just run through quickly the 5 points that we've had so far for those who've come in later. The first point is the mistake beginners often make is to rushing too far too fast with the subjects that are chosen to draw. And we can end up wasting a lot of time drawing things badly for a long time because they're just too hard for us and we're not learning good lessons. We're learning bad lessons. The second point is don't start not the second mistake is not starting with the materials and the methods that we want to become good at. So it's starting with pen because we think starting with pencil because we think it's going to be easier when what we want to learn to do is draw with pen, or it's starting by copying or tracing when what we want to do is to learn to draw freehand, because they're streets that go in different directions. So we want to make sure we're on the right road to get to the place, the end of the journey that we want to reach. The third point is that we want artworks rather than learning experiences. And if we focus on artworks and wanting artworks, that can really inhibit us because then we become afraid of mistakes. And so we're not free now to explore and take risks and just splash around ink all over the place and see the effect and then refine that into something that we can use. And the fourth point is not using references, is drawing from our imagination. Because at the very start, if I draw from a reference, I can then compare how I've gone and I can get a sense of achievement. If I draw from my imagination, it can look okay, but I have no idea whether I've really achieved what I was wanting to achieve when I started to draw it. So even if my aim is to draw from my imagination, I think this is an example, I think an exception. I think it's always helpful to, when we start to learn to draw from references so that we can measure more objectively how we're going. And the last point that I'd covered already was that we worry about the quality of our materials way too much. We need to stop asking artists, what materials are you using? And we need to ask them, what are you thinking before you put the pen on the paper? The brand of the pen isn't nearly as significant as what are you thinking? How are you working out where to put the mark and what that mark should be? They're the questions we should be asking, not what pen are you using? Okay, so that were the first 5 points. We've got 5 more points. The sixth point when we're a beginner drawer is, and I'm assuming we're self-taught because we don't need to worry about things if we're doing a course because the teacher has determined the curriculum and is presumably pacing us along and making these decisions wisely for us, and we've paid them for that. But if we're self-taught, I think it's a big mistake, particularly with all the online resources, is to think that all the videos are the same, all the teachers are the same, that it's all going to be helpful. And it's just not true. There are good videos, there are not so helpful videos for what I'm wanting to achieve. A lot of videos are really more for entertainment than for drawing. And that's great if I want entertainment. Like, there's nothing wrong with that. There's a place for all these videos. But I can use, if what I'm really wanting to do is focus on learning to draw, then I don't want to be watching videos that half of the time is really just entertainment and clever filmmaking, because that time is not progressing my drawing. And in fact, that element of it may be better than the actual drawing element of teaching what I want to learn. So, and equally, perhaps some videos that are slightly less flash and perhaps aren't videoed or edited or whatever as well as others might actually be better with content, might be better paced or better phrased, or the subject material might be more appropriate for what I'm wanting to learn. So it's been very choosy with the teaching videos we watch. And we also need to understand, I mean, I have a few videos on this, what videos are good for you, because, and please remember to hit the like button if you're finding this interesting or helpful. Please hit the like button. That does help me, and put a comment on the video. It's not in the chat, but on the video. That's also helpful for me. And if you haven't hit subscribe, then please do that too, because all the things I'm talking about have whole videos on them. If any of the things I'm talking about ring true for you, then there's almost certainly a whole video on just that subject. I have around 500 teaching videos that I've done now. And unlike many teachers, these aren't just teasers to get you to pay for my course. Everything I know is in these videos. So please hit the like button if you can. But we also need to realize that not every teaching method is compatible with every other teaching method too. And so if we switch videos a lot and have lots of different teachers, we can actually, without realizing, do things in contradictory ways and be learning methods and approaches that don't line up with something I've done or something I will do. So I would really suggest finding a number of teachers, a number of videos that you can use, and staying with those teachers at least until you feel you've got all that's from them that's going to be useful for where you're wanting to go with your drawing, because that way you'll get a consistency in what you do. Just having a look at the chat. People saying they like the idea of cheap materials. Yep, far more experimental without the fear of wasting. Yep, Lee is saying the same thing. Finds a normal pen just as good. Me too. Using cheap pens, not as cheap as wanted. And we have a point about using references. That references are also important to understand light, and that's another important fact too, that it can be difficult from our imagination even to be aware of the fact that we need to be considering light source a lot of the time as well. And so using those references help us with that. Frode, I hope that's right. Draw very different scenes from architectural wonders to humble cottages. Are there any buildings or landscapes you avoid or dislike? What would you recommend for a beginner? Look, there are none that I dislike. There are some that I don't have much experience in. I don't live near the beach. I love going to the beach. I feel that waves are a bit of a challenge with a fine liner. And so I probably don't draw much that's a beachscape unless I can make the rocks the focus. I've really been enjoying some of the nature scenes I've drawn, some of the bush scenes. I often go walking in a national park, and so I just surrounded by gum trees and other trees, and I just see things that I want to draw and think, oh, there's so much to capture there. And the thing I like about nature is that it doesn't work out very well with outline. We really have to capture the effect. So I'm just reaching across to get a vase that's on the table. So this is a fine-leafed bottle brush, which is an Australian tree. And how do I capture this effect? Because if I'm drawing this, I cannot draw the detail. I cannot draw an outline. I have to create marks that capture an effect. And how do I do that? And I'm forced to do that if I draw nature. If I'm just drawing the vase, I can be tempted to just draw outline and not be thinking of form and of 3 dimensions and of effect. And so drawing nature can push us in a way that drawing other things don't. But look, I think one of my first points was to draw things that we have a chance of drawing well. And so when we start to draw, when we're beginners or at any stage, there's no point in attempting things I'm going to fail at because I simply don't have the fundamentals under my belt to be able to do them well. Absolutely no point drawing things I'm going to fail in. So therefore, it's not so much what the subject is, whether it's a tree or a building or a street scene, but it's to choose something that I can capture well and learn good lessons in. I think that's the important thing. Another mistake I think people make when they start to draw is, this is point 7 now, is not finishing the drawing in one session. I think there's huge benefit in going from start to finish in the one go. There's a momentum that we build. There's a rhythm that we build. There's memories and muscle memories that we build for a particular drawing with our eyes, with our arms, with our hands. And if we disconnect that for a day, a week, a month, we can't ever get back to the same place. It's like we're starting again when we start. And I really think there's just so much value and benefit and momentum in finishing in one go. And it doesn't matter whether we draw for 20 minutes or for 6 hours. I mean, I do some drawings for my YouTube videos that take 10 minutes. The drawing I did the other day of the Berliner Dom, which I've been wanting to do for a long time. I've had it there just waiting for me to think up an excuse to use it. That took me 2 hours to draw, which is about as long as I can video and then edit and do all of that stuff for. But for my Instagram channel, I would do 6 hour drawings. Now they're not freehand ink drawings. They have a pencil and grid underlining, but they would take 6 hours to do. So I'm not talking about the length of time. Whatever length of time we choose, I think it's incredibly helpful to choose drawings, subjects that we can do from start to finish in that time. So yeah, that's my seventh point. I just have a few comments here. When reference lack depth of value shadows, I invent them. You can invent time of day or weather to enhance the depth of values. Yeah. And look, that was, I'm not sure when you came in, No Chefs here, but one of the points that wasn't one of my points, but came from a comment in the chat. So please give me the comments in the chat. We've had some great things that have come from the chat. So give me some comments. But one of the important things was the point that often we make the mistake of thinking that copying the photo reference realistically or exactly is our goal. No, our goal is to do a good drawing, and it's to improve on the weaknesses of photos. And so certainly the lack of depth is an incredible, probably the most important one of those usually. But yes, we can manipulate the values and the shadows. We can create greater contrast, and we can move things slightly so that we have darks against lights more, and we can create more of what I like to call visual drama that gives a picture a real kind of zing. We can minimize the midtones that might be in our photo and just massage some to be slightly lighter, some to be slightly darker, maybe slightly move things so that things are hard up against each other, and create a far more visually dramatic picture. So I think that is a very helpful thing to do. And we can change the weather. We can change the direction of the sun. I have done that to change the shadows. But you can't do that unless you've been practiced at drawing scenes with a light source, and then over time learn to appreciate how that works. And then you can imagine accurately the light coming from a different direction. So but I think it's a big mistake not to finish in one session, because partly too, that probably often means that a lot of things just aren't finished, because when the next session starts, it's always more exciting to start a new thing. I mean, how many half-finished projects do we all have around? And many in the same type of thing, whether it's, I don't know, stripping back furniture or I don't know, knitting or learning an instrument or something, because it's always more exciting to start a new thing. So I think it's important to have a session where we can finish. And because there are things also that we learn in the second half of a drawing that we don't learn in the first half. There are skills that we develop in the second half. And if I don't finish my drawings, then I never learn those things. Or if I only ever finish half of them, I only learn those skills with half the experience of the skills I learned in the first half. And so that's really important, that I finish things in one go. And we don't have to have the same length of time. And in fact, I think there's advantages in maybe doing a half-hour drawing one session, and then doing an hour drawing the next session. And I enjoy, after I suppose because I'm making the videos, my drawings now tend to be shorter time frames. But when that happens, I find that I love to then have a chance where I think, well, I'm going to spend an hour drawing this now. And it's just lovely to have that time and the thought and the ability to do things technically that aren't necessary or possible in a shorter time frame. So that's that was point number 7. Okay, mistake number 8 is, with our practice when we're a beginner, I think a common mistake is that we try harder rather than trying differently. I'm all for hard work, you've heard me say that. And I'm all for practice, you've heard me say that. But if I practice making mistakes all the time, the same mistakes all the time, my drawing is not going to improve. I'm going to do lots of drawings that have all the same problems over and over again. If I'm not improving, if I'm not happy with the development of my drawings, I need to shake something up. I need to do something differently. And we can get very much in a rut. We can very much get in a mindset. And again, if we have a teacher, the teacher can set different parameters. If we're in a class, an art class will have weeks where you do 3 20-minute drawings as opposed to one 1-hour drawing. So we need to do that to ourselves, because it just stimulates our thinking, our creativity. It pushes us in ways, and it needs a different graphic technique as well to do the same scene in 10 minutes or 20 minutes or 30 minutes. I've got some videos where I do that, the same scene in 10, 20, 30 minutes. And the different choices, the different techniques, the different ways the drawings look are all very helpful. Some more ads are coming, so if they appear, please just let them run. And again, if you haven't hit the like button and you've been finding these interesting, if you've just come in, please hit the like button. It helps me and my channel out as well. There's a few comments here. I'll just have a look and see what they are. Arta Jill saying, finds the things I dislike drawing are usually subjects I'm not great at. I go off and learn about the subject, the anatomy of it, practice, and hopefully learning means I go on to enjoy it. Yeah. When we draw, we want to do well. And so if we're not doing well at a subject and we realize we're not doing well, then it's easy to avoid those subjects. Now, look, we can make the choices. If I try and draw waves and they look lousy, I can say, well, I'm just not going to draw beach scenes. I don't need to. I'll draw mountain scenes and I'll draw street scenes, and I'll feel better about that. And that's fine. There's no reason why we have to draw anything. But if we want to draw something and we're struggling with it, then we often need to focus our information, our study more. We need to really go deep at understanding that. When I first started drawing, painting rather, I've just gone out of camera to reach off the wall. This was the first flower I drew. They're called Gaimea lilies, and they're big things. They're a Gaimea flower head can be like this wide across. They're big and they're heavy, and they create these dark shadows. And often when you take a photo, it's all very dark and it's a bit hard to see. And I often had trouble getting those dark parts looking right. And what I did one day, I saw one in a market for sale that hadn't opened. And so I bought it and put it in a bucket, and it took a month to fully open. It lived in the bucket for a month, with all these flowers opening bit by bit. And by the time I'd finished that month, I understood the anatomy of these flowers so well, I never had a problem again painting them, because if parts were in shadow, if it wasn't really clear, I had such a strong sense of how this plant, how this flower had formed, and how the flowers opened up. And I found I was able to interpret the darkness in a really credible way. So it can be important, if there's a particular subject that we want to draw or paint or whatever, to do that, to study that with a focus. Arthur Jules is saying, if I mess up, I use it to experiment. Hey, it's already not what I hoped it would be. That's right. So you can take the risk. If you've got a drawing that's not worked out, then use it consciously for experimentation. Go for it. And Mel saying, agree, less expectation from drawing what I think it should be is helpful, as the artwork will take on its own personality to an extent. And look, sometimes, yes, as we draw something and as it progresses, we see possibilities that we didn't see at the start. And I'm not sure this is an easy thing to do as a beginner, but certainly as we move into perhaps a more intermediate, more mid-ground stage of our drawing development, we can start to then seize these opportunities. And it can be hard to let go of being as literal to the reference as we've been used to, and start to branch into introducing our own creative perceptions into our drawing. But it's a great skill to develop. Okay, so that was the 8th point, that mistake beginners make: trying harder rather than trying differently, which often is the way we need to go. Now, I think this 9th one is probably the most important one. And I'm saying that because I think it's probably the one that beginners are least likely to think of. And I think it's something that probably people well past the beginner stage probably need to think of more. And it's something you've heard me speak more of in the last few months. But I think it's really easy for beginners with pen to focus on line and outline way too much, instead of focusing on marks and effect, which can include line and outline, but goes way beyond that. And the problem with line and outline is that it often comes from our childhood past in very two-dimensional cartoons. I mean, I don't mean all that amazing sort of anime artwork, but it can come from childhood cartoons, which really are outlines and are colored often, usually just flat infill of the one color, the one value. And it can be easy to think that when I'm drawing with pen, learning to draw with pen, I've just got to get the outline correct, when outline isn't always a very good way of capturing what I'm seeing. And this is why people so often have problems drawing trees, because how do you draw outline with leaves? And we know what leaves look like. We know they've got edges, and that's also a problem. We're familiar with them. We know what's there, and that challenges us in drawing it even more. So, and then we start trying to draw leaves, which of course is hopeless. And when we realize that we can't draw the leaves, we then start to try and create a pattern, a leaf pattern, and that just looks crazy too. And then around the outside of a tree, if all I have is a line, then I've now got this heavy line, which absolutely doesn't represent the effect that we see when we see the edge of a tree canopy, because it's not like a cutout sheet of metal. It's a lot of little objects, some of which are closer and some of which are further apart, that create this effect. And we have to capture the effect. And capturing that effect, if I'm thinking I've got to make marks on the paper to create the effect rather than draw a line, particularly an outline, is a much more helpful way to go. And again, unfortunately, a lot of videos place great emphasis on drawing lines and outlines as what we need to do. And even with buildings, outline is not always so helpful. And one common technique mistake I often see with beginner drawings is is a heavy outline drawn around the absolute silhouette edge of something, as if, well, this is an important line, so I need to go around it. And often it's even more than one object. So um, that's it's not helpful if we focus on lines and drawing outlines and getting the outline correct. I mean, as a component technique of a larger drawing, yes, it can be very helpful. And sometimes it's best to look at form and three dimensions and to try and capture the effect of three dimensions. And sometimes for a particular part of our drawing, it's more helpful to see it as a two-dimensional shape, as edges of a shape, and to try and create that shape with lines in our drawing. It just depends what we're trying to draw and which way works best. But we have to be able to do both to have the choice. And so that's, as we learn to draw, I think this is what we're doing. We're learning the options that we will need to draw the sort of subjects that we want using the materials that we want to draw. So I really think that point 9, to not focus on lines and outlines, but to really be thinking marks and creating effects right from the start, right from the word go, is a really helpful way to do it. And the 10th mistake I think beginners make at the start when we're self-taught is isolation. And this is a really difficult one because sometimes there just is nobody around. But because I can do it totally myself at home watching YouTube videos, doesn't mean that I should, unless it really is the only option. It is wonderful connecting with other artists, and they don't even have to be doing the same particular art I do. They may be doing abstract art or op art or painting as opposed to my drawing, or they may use watercolor and I just use black ink, whatever. It doesn't matter, but to have connection with people who are on a kind of a creative journey in a similar vein of art as us, it can be tremendously encouraging. And there is a lot of overlap. There is a lot of overlap of wider, more embracing technique or just things that happen in our head when we're trying to do things, or some of the practical considerations of time and busy schedules, ways we can carve out time. And particularly if there are groups that we can join or meet with. I mean, if you like drawing architecture and there's an urban sketching group in your city, in your area, why not find out? Why not find out? USK is the initial. Google USK and put your city, USK, Sydney, Barcelona, London, and find out when your urban sketching group meets, and get on the mailing list, and every month or whenever get told what location in the city to go and meet, just to sit in the street and draw with other people. It's a lot of fun. He says, I've actually only managed it once. I went with Sydney just the month before we locked down for like, it felt like 2 years. Every month it's on. Almost always I've got something on and I can't get there. But I have other ways of connecting with artists. But it's really important somehow. Maybe there's a local community group that does art, and you can go and just do art together. Or look at it. Maybe it happens online for you, but maybe you can start to connect through comments with other artists who do similar things. And I know that some of you on my live chat sessions chat to each other, and that's great. I think that's really great, because it's I think most journeys are not as easy if we do them on our own. So trying to avoid isolation, but it's not just isolation, like in that kind of connecting with other artists and in the process. but I think it's also the isolation of what I'm trying to achieve. So I think it's also helpful to have inspiration from other artists. I think it's helpful to find artists who are doing the sort of thing we would like to be able to do, and not to copy them, but to try and work out what they're doing and how they're doing it, or even just to realize it can be done and then work out how I'm going to do it. I think that's really important. Um, Not to copy their drawings, because then I learn nothing of the creative process. I learn nothing of the thinking that has to happen. Um, but but to um, but to see things and think, okay, well, I have no idea how I would draw using ink a nighttime scene or a dark interior scene. Like, how do you draw light? So I need to find some artists who have done that. And that is not hard on social media. It's not hard with search engines. I need to look to see what they've done. And what I need to do is not to copy their complicated thing, but to find a very simple example and do that. Arta Jules, thank you. Yes, Inktober this month. It's a great way to see other artists online. But Jules, maybe you can tell me, because I was thinking of this too. Beyond, like for me, the only way I'm aware of that I could be a part of that is when I post my Instagram drawings to have a hashtag Inktober, so that people who are searching Inktober can have my drawings come up on that. But how can we get involved? Is there a way that people can get involved with Inktober beyond that? Like, how do we connect with that? I was wondering that myself the other day, but it does sound like is it only on Instagram, or is it wider than Instagram? But yeah, but it certainly is a great month if we like drawing in ink, that's for sure. Gosh, that's my 10 points. So, anyone who's listening right now have any other lessons that they learned, or mistakes they made as a beginner that I haven't covered, that you'd like to then put that on the chat now. Or if there's a question related to drawing and the sorts of things we've been talking about, or something I've said has raised a question in a slightly different direction that you want to ask me, then now's your chance, because I'm here. And if not, well, we'll wrap this up. But if there's a thought, if there's a question that you'd like my thoughts, my experience on, yes, half. So this will be totally uploaded, unedited as soon as I finish. So you will be able to see the whole thing again. So again, if you've not hit the like button, then please do that. That would be a help for me and for my channel. Yeah, we've just changed to summertime. So yeah, we're all a bit out of sorts. Bye. Enjoy lunch, Yana. What do I think of the 10,000 rule? I don't know the 10,000 rule, Jessica. It is interesting, actually, with this, because I am self-taught myself, and I often get questions that presume I know a whole lot more than I know. That presume that I have um, a more classical drawing path, whereas really, because I'm self-taught, and really most of it's just my working out myself, so I know what I do, and I think I do it quite well, but I'm often very ignorant of other ways that other people do it, and particularly other ways that may be taught. So yes, I'm often surprisingly ignorant of things that that are sometimes quite fundamental in drawing teaching. So Jessica, if you told me what the 10,000 rule is, you can post on any social media using the same hashtags. Jake Parker and Inktober have a website that you can find more info. Okay, that's great. So look, yeah, that is a great connection, a great way of connecting with a wider a wider group of artists. Do I recommend Inktober to beginners? I recommend you have a look, at least, because there will be a wide range of things on it. But I'm sure it is a way that professional artists showcase their things. So, I mean, don't be either discouraged or too carried away too quickly. But, I think particularly when we're beginning, we don't even have a full understanding of the possibilities in our craft. And so it can be good to do things such as this, and then make a decision whether you actually want to put your work out there. Oh, you need okay, thanks, Jochen. You need 10,000 hours of deliberate practice to master a skill. Uh-huh. Yeah. Look, you need hours. Do you need 10,000 hours? I don't know. Um I mean, work smarter, not harder is a bit of a cliche, but there is some truth in that. We can spend, if we're not careful, we can spend a lot of time progressing very slowly, and we could progress a lot faster if we did things differently. And so just sitting there for 10,000 hours with dragging a pen across a sheet of paper may not necessarily get us very far if we do the same thing all the time, and it's not very helpful what we're doing. And that's why one of my points was, if we're not progressing, we need to change what we're doing in some way. Or it may be that we were given some bad teaching advice by someone we listened to early on, and we never challenged that. We never perhaps saw some other videos and saw a different teacher's way of thinking and of talking and of presenting. And so we kind of stayed in the same box, and it turned out not to be a very helpful box. I would say that if after a period of time of trying hard, you don't think you've really improved at all, that what you're doing is looking the same, then you have to change what you're doing. And changing the videos you watch may be part of that. I hope that doesn't mean changing my videos, but if you're not improving with my teaching, then find a thinking framework where you are improving, because that's why you're doing it. Be a long time before I show anything. Well, me too. We can get a bit precious, but equally when we're just starting or when we're exploring, yeah, yeah, there are some things that we just do ourselves, and I think that's very, very helpful. And look, what is a beginner? When do you stop being a beginner? When do you become intermediate? When are you a professional? When are you an artist? When can you use the word artist? I mean, who knows? It's really our own perception. I mean, I suppose I'm a beginner if I'm feeling that I've still got so far to go, that I'm a beginner. And then my framework is, I'm a beginner. If I feel like I've progressed quite some distance from where I started, then I'm no longer a beginner and I'm in a more intermediate place. If I feel like there really aren't many more challenges in what I'm trying to do, that I feel like I'm achieving what I was trying to do, then I've probably progressed past the intermediate stage in that thing. But I keep talking about it. I'm not doing it yet, but I want to start applying watercolor to my drawings now, and I will start that as a beginner, even though I'm not a beginner, and I'm probably up the professional end of my line drawing. I'll be starting again as a beginner, at watercolor, and at what point do I, who knows. And so, I mean, we're not rushing with labels, but we usually know if we're a beginner. We know we're starting, and I think it can be helpful to avoid these mistakes. When we're starting, we want to start in a way that will maximize the benefit for the effort and time we put in, because we don't need to learn to draw. We're doing it for fun, for pleasure, plus whatever else we might hope to get out of it. And so we want to do well. We want to succeed. And so we want to make good choices at the start. And that's what I hope these 10 points will help beginners out there do, to make good choices that will maximize the benefits. Yeah, we can be a beginner for a long time. Me too. Um, yeah, join on and off for almost 30 years and still have so much to learn. I mean, look, there always is so much to learn. Um, we can be learning new things and not be a beginner, but yeah, I think in a sense we get that call. We get that call ourselves. Okay. Any final thoughts on this before we say good night? The silence is deafening. Well, thank you, Sharon. That's kind of you to say. I think the one thing about my teaching, I hope it's very practical, because, as I said, it really comes from. Some of it comes from because I did teach in the early 80s. I'm that old. I did teach in the early 80s, English, but as part of my training for that, for high school teaching, I learned how we learn. That was part of what we did, learning how we learn, and that's been very helpful for me. And then because I have actually learned to draw in a relatively recent period of time, in the last 5 or 6 years, the process of that is very fresh. That in my mind, it doesn't seem like that long ago. It was only like it was 2018. I was looking at the Musée du Louvre, wishing I could draw it and thinking, but how can you ever draw this? And I've learnt now in 5 years how you can draw that, and I've progressed to the point where I can. So I still remember what it was like to look at it and just be amazed at the architecture and think, this is just beyond being able to do. But I've learned techniques that have enabled me to do it. I've learned to draw the effect of what I see, whether it's a tree or whether it's architectural sculptures on the front of a neoclassical building. The same principles enable me to translate what's in front of me into ink marks on paper. And so all that's still very fresh, I suppose. And combined, as I said, with this framework of understanding how we learn, it's, I do hope my videos are very practical. Like that I do the techniques rather than step by step. Yeah, see, I think the step by step is not helpful, because what you've got to learn to do is not to copy the lines I make, but what you need to do is learn how to think. And that's not necessarily learning how to think the way I think, but the way I think can be a starting point for you then to firstly see an example of what creative thought processes are, and then, if you want, use them as a basis or as a foundation to develop your own. And that's the important thing. It's not putting the line on the paper that's difficult. It's knowing what line or what mark we want to put and where to put it. That's the thing, not the actual putting on. I mean, we can learn to draw relatively straight lines or curved lines if we concentrate on it relatively easily. But knowing how I translate what's in front of me into marks, that's the challenge. That's the challenge. That's the hard part. And how do you do that in a video? You certainly can't do it copy by copy. So, yeah, I mean, I'm not trying to be critical of anyone. And if you want to learn to copy, that's great. But I do feel that a lot of people end up watching copy step-by-step videos that don't teach the creative thought processes, when what they want to learn is the creative thought processes. And that's the problem. When what I want to learn isn't being taught, by what I'm watching. And I don't know if you know, but I've got about 500 videos now. So if you've only looked at my more recent videos, then please scroll back down through my content and see some of the earlier ones. I've got a great series of 4 videos at the very start on how to observe, 4 different ways of observing our subject before we start to draw, which are the 4 ways I think, the way I incorporate observation. I should put them on a playlist just to make it easier to find them. But yeah, go back and look at some of those earlier ones. Thanks. To get the proportion right, some steps are essentials. Yep, look, I've my last couple of videos have been about how I get proportions, and I do plan to do a video where I don't so much do a drawing, but I actually step by step, just with some simple diagrams, perhaps make clearer my process. But if you look at my very last video, which is a very complex, one of the most complex freehand drawings I've done, of a big cathedral in Berlin, I particularly talk about my process of, on a big complex scene, big complex building, when I'm drawing directly in pen on the paper. So every line, every mark I make will be there at the end. And it's a long building that goes down in 2 directions, and it goes upwards. There's foreshortening upwards and down both sides. How do I get all the proportions correct? Because it's a challenge for me too, trust me. And so I explained that in that last video. So yeah, okay. If you stop learning about something, you're probably done creating that medium. Yeah, look, I think that's true. I think that is there is always something new. There is always something to push further, a new direction, a new thought. That's the nature of creativity, and that's what we're on about. All right, look, I think I will end this here. But look, thanks for joining. I've particularly enjoyed going through these points tonight. So I hope they've been helpful for you. If you've missed them, look, for many of you it's Sunday morning. I'm about to go to bed and get ready for Monday morning. But for many of you it's Sunday morning. So if you miss the earlier ones, why not put it on while you do the dishes or do something else, and go back to the start and just catch those earlier ones. But otherwise, hey, whatever you draw, however you're drawing it, whatever stage of drawing you're at, make sure you have fun. I'll see you next time. And if you haven't hit like, please remember to. See you next time. Bye.